If you're not familiar with who I am a past president of TAP. I've been in this industry since 1999, doing 9% deals in El Paso, builder and developer, have a management company, owner, and I try to stay active and involved in public policy, I think, as we all should in this industry, because it's such a nuanced program. It's so hard for people that are outside of this conference to understand what we do, the nuances of the complex financing package we put together. And I'm very pleased to have this distinguished panel up here. And I think we'll just, they're pretty well-known guys. I know them all very well. They're foremost experts on the DC federal part of the program and the lobbying part and the advocacy part that we all benefit from. So the format for this is I've got some predetermined questions for them that I'm going to bounce off them, but we really want to get your questions answered, especially with the big, beautiful, I guess it's called One Big Beautiful Act now instead of One Big Beautiful Bill, has passed and is on the books, because this is the place, it's relatively new, and if you have some questions, these are the guys to ask. So if you have a question while we're on topic, raise your hand or at the end, but I want to make sure that I leave some time at the end, and please be, you know, just jump right out there with your questions, and we'll get them answered. So I wanted to start out really with just like, to me, what was the biggest thing as a tax credit developer was when we got the 12.5% 5-year temporary thing taken away from us, increase in allocation nationwide. I guess that expired in 22 or 23, something like 21. And so when that went away, that was really devastating for you know, all of us. And now that it's back in, you guys want to talk about that and explain that a little bit, the 12% increase? Who wants to take that?
Peter, go ahead.
Sure.
Peter?
And just want to thank TAP for including me. It's so great to come here to talk about great news coming out of Washington, D.C. For affordable housing. So the bill does increase on a permanent basis starting for calendar year 2026. Both your per capita, so right now we're at $3 per person for your 9% allocation, by 12%, plus still allows for the annual inflation adjustment. So we at Novogradac, we're projecting that the 2026 per capita rate will be $3.40, given both the 12% increase plus what we anticipate will be the inflation factor. So that's a great, and what that translates to in terms of allocations is for this year, there are about $10.5 billion in 9% allocations available in the population-based credits, putting aside the carryover returns and national pool credits, and we're anticipating that will go up to $12 billion next year. So roughly $1.5 billion in allocations, and at what we see as median equity pricing these days, which I know could change. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. Of 85 cents, that's roughly $1 billion more of equity available out there from just the 9% side of the program.
And you guys, who wants to talk about the increase in the 4%, the bond ratio, the debt to bond ratio, and that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So this is the 9% credit increase is paired with a change on the bond side, which also will be very positive for states that are bond constrained, and we've seen an increasing number of states approach their cap or even hit their cap. So instead of having to hit 50% of the basis being covered by bonds, this will lower it down to 25%. Which not only will help potentially reduce the cost of your deals, maybe you don't have to refinance out of that, but is also going to make more bonds available, because instead of putting excess resources into a project that you don't need, we'll be able to use those for other projects. So combined, these are two significant investments, and again, just to emphasize, both of these changes are permanent. So that's also a really significant change to the program for the years and decades ahead.
Yeah.
They really weren't permanent when they came out of the House version. And, you know, the House version passed by one vote, and then it went to the Senate. The Senate made it permanent and drastically changed the bill and sent back a bill to the House that didn't even look like the bill they sent back, but the House passed that by 3 or 4 votes. So it was a pretty strange process. The fact that we've got them permanent, which I think JP's been very good on that point, which is we haven't had a permanent provision since the corporate rate, JP, I think it was, back in 2017. So, you know, whatever is permanent in the code is apt to change this year. We've had 8 reconciliation bills in the past 40 years. It seems like it's a little bit of a pendulum back and forth. One party comes in with slim majorities and a wide policy divide, and they pass a reconciliation bill one way, and then it goes the other way a few years later. So hopefully that can stop in the future, but we're very happy about the LIHTC provisions.
Talk to us a little bit about some of the other provisions in the bill that affect us as tax credit developers, maybe some of the bonus depreciation or accelerated depreciation. Or some
Before
of
I
the-
do that, can I just
Yep.
give a few more points on the 25%
Yep.
test that the audience should know about? I mean, one thing is there's some great transition rules associated with this that we were able to work in. Sometimes, you know, you're not able to work those into the bill in the last moment, but we were well prepared. And so there are 2 key things to know about when this 25% test will come into effect. It does have to, you know, apply to properties that are placed in service next year. So if you place the property in this year, you're not able to do that, with one exception, and that is if you have an acquisition rehab deal and say you acquire the property this year, but you finish the rehab next year, you're eligible. That's the first test. The second test is how much of the bonds from next year you need. And the way it's drafted is you need only 5% of the total land and building costs of your property to be financed with bonds issued next year or later. So what you can do, what you can ask TDHCA now is for an allocation of, say, 25% of 2025 bonds, and then early next year, they can give you that extra 5%, and you're good. You don't need the full amount that of 50 that you had to if under the old rules. And that's a way you can actually start taking advantage of this 25% test a little early. And want to encourage that. Now, of course, there are important considerations that I'm happy to talk offline about that, but I do want to just encourage folks to start thinking about it now, taking advantage of the opportunity now, because I think that's too often you sometimes have to wait for something to kick in, and it's not really the case for this. But I'm also happy to talk about bonus depreciation too, Bobby, but I just wanted to make that point.
Sure, and I want, we don't have microphones out in the audience yet, and at the end, I'm going to have a Q&A session, and we'll get a microphone out there. If you want to take notes of some of the more complex things that we're talking about up here and ask questions, we certainly want to get those answered. Sure. So just hold on to that, and we'll continue going through the bill. But yeah, sure, Peter, why don't you kick us off talking about some of the other provisions in the bill, bonus depreciation, accelerated depreciation, those
Yeah,
things.
one of the great other elements, another permanent provision, which applies more broadly, of course, but is particularly helpful for affordable rental housing, is 100% bonus depreciation. I mean, currently, before the act was passed on 4th of July, you were only able to expense 40% of your property that's 15 years or less. So think site improvements, think about appliances, think about furniture, fixtures, those type of elements of your housing property. And after July 4th, as long as the property is acquired and placed in service after July 19th of 2025, wondering that day, well, January 20, sorry, did I say July? I meant January 19th. That day is picked, of course, because January 20th is inauguration day. And so as long as you do that, then you can fully expense, you can elect to fully expense that 15-year property or less, which should help equity pricing, especially for bond finance deals, because they tend to have more tax losses than a 9% deal has. And so that will be particularly helpful to bolster equity pricing. I know people are concerned about that. This is one of the elements of the bill that really helps increase that. And I do want to say, for those of you who do have capital account issues, however, where 100% expensing might be challenging, you have an ability to actually elect to stay at 40% if you want. There's, again, one of the special transition rules in the bill. You can elect to do 40%. You can actually even elect to do 0 if you want, but I don't imagine many people want to do that. But that for this year only, you have those 3 options, either 0, 40, or 100. Starting next year, it's just going to be 100 going forward. But for most people, that's what you want.
Yeah, and I just want to add, that's a huge thing for the investor syndicators. So, like all of us developers need to corner the equity providers and syndicators that are here at this conference and tell them that because of the accelerated depreciation, we can now all expect higher pricing, right? So, but it really should create that pressure. That's a fantastic provision in there, because they're making these investments for the credits and the losses, and now their losses are accelerated. So it increases their IRR, and that's how this is. At least that's what we're all told as developers, right? That
Right.
Their hands are tied because the IRR is too low. But anyways, so you guys have something else to add to what Peter was talking about with those provisions, Bob, JP?
I mean, aside from bonus depreciation, I think, one of the fun, I don't know if fun isn't the right word, but one of the interesting components of this bill is it's, in some manner, it's anticlimactic. Because the tax code isn't changing. And from a business standpoint, your business tax situation is going to look a lot like it does this year when we get to next year. But that wasn't known 3 or 4 months ago. In fact, we were facing a $4 trillion tax increase that was set to take effect starting January 1st. So it's anticlimactic in the sense of what's not changing, but in terms of what was voided, it's one of the most significant tax bills to make its way through Congress that we've ever had. And so that means the marginal rates stay the same on the individual side. Bob mentioned one of the interesting choices made in 2017 with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was to make the corporate rate permanent, but not the individual marginal rates. And if you're a pass-through business, that's what you care about, is the individual marginal rates. Not only are they made permanent, but they're not increased. And that was a discussion point. The president, in fact, pushed for higher individual marginal rates, and Congress did not do that. The 199A deduction for pass-through businesses, that 20% deduction, is made permanent. The alternative minimum tax, which has a lot of correlation with other tax credits, those exemptions and increases are made permanent. So we now see about 200,000 taxpayers facing the AMT. If that wasn't made permanent, it would probably be somewhere in the 6 million range. So another great change. Estate tax, another important thing for a lot of the developer community, made permanent. So there's a number of really good changes that I want to make sure everyone understands, that there was a lot of potential disaster headed off in terms of getting a bill that seems rather anticlimactic. I can just tell you, going through it, it wasn't so anticlimactic. It was quite dramatic at times. But I'm glad to be able to say this is a boring tax bill in a lot of ways, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's the Accountant Security Act of 2025.
Let's see. Anything else to add? Let's talk about energy tax credits a little bit from the bill, and the winners and losers in that. Peter, JP?
So, well, that's not the great, since part of the bill is perhaps not the good news, unfortunately. I think for most of this audience, folks care about 2 particular tax incentives. One is the Section 45L New Energy Efficient Home Tax Credit, And unfortunately, that will be sunsetting fairly soon. The deadline for you to take advantage of that is for property that's placed in service and leased up. That's what acquired means in the context of 45L. So unfortunately, if you plan to have your property and you went ahead and you did all the work to meet the standards in that, for that credit, you have to make sure it's leased up by June 30th of next year. Now, fortunately, it is a unit-by-unit test. So say you did the whole building to meet that 45L standard, and you lease up, say, 80% of your property. Well, you can at least take 80% of the credits. It's not a cliff test where it's all or nothing. So that's at least a minor silver lining to this cloud. But want to encourage folks that you need to make sure you act fast. Try to get those units you used 45L on leased up as quickly as possible, because that timing is coming quick. The other, I think, major credit that most folks in this audience use is the credit for solar. And the one that's sort of really in effect right now is the Section 48 Cap E Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit. And I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly, so if you have questions, there are a couple of deadlines that you need to think about when thinking about this credit. One thing is if you start your construction now this year, you're able to basically operate as you were planning on going forward, meaning you get the full amount of the credits, and you can source your components like you normally would, generally speaking, and you've got 4 years to place in service. And and I want to make clear, I'm talking only about the solar facility, not say the housing credit property that you're putting those solar panels on, for example. If you start constructions starting in January 1st of next year on that, you still have your 4 years, you still have your full amount, but you have to apply to these new restrictions called foreign entity of concern, which basically means you can't have components that come from one of the 4 countries of concern: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, which basically means China, because their vast majority of components for solar come from China. And you can't have a material involvement with some entity that has an association with China. So that starts on January 1st, and you've got until July 4th to be able to take advantage of your full 4 years to place in service. If you start construction after July 4th of next year, you not only, again, have to adhere to those foreign entity concern rules, you'll only have until December 31st, 2027 to place in service, which is less than 18 months. So you go from 4 years to less than 18 months in one day. And it's very challenging because, place in service for a solar facility doesn't just mean also building it. You also have to make sure it's connected to the grid, and that can be challenging to do in that short period of time. And if you place in service after December 31st, 2027, you get no credit under this at all. So those are the sort of the deadlines to keep in mind. You have a little bit of, a runway, roughly 12 months of some freedom to operate, but it starts shutting down fairly quickly thereafter. So again, time is of the essence.
I'll add to 145L. I talked to a lot of builders about. That's the Energy Star credit. So if you're not familiar with the terminology, if you're getting Energy Star to get a tax credit, that's the one that Peter's referring to. A lot of these dates were, not a lot, all of them were constantly changed throughout this process. So for the record-setting 45 days that it took to move this bill through Congress, this was constantly changing and evolving. So I just want to put that out there, that if you or someone in your company has a date, go and make sure that's the actual date that was passed by the Senate on July 1st, because that's not the dates that the House passed, and it's not the dates on some of the draft bills that were out there. And for the most part, the date changes were an improvement because a lot of us were actively lobbying in order to get more time. The other thing I want to mention on the 48E, the solar credit, is, part of there was a lot of deal making, not surprising, by the president to get the votes to pass this bill. And one of the pressure points was these energy tax credits. The House initially passed a very stringent and quick repeal of these credits. A lot of them, under the House approach, would have ended at the end of this year. And then when it moved over to the Senate said, yeah, that's not going to happen. But you had this core group of conservatives over in the House who basically threw a fit and said, if you change those dates, we're not going to vote for the bill when it comes back to the House. Well, they did vote for the bill, which is another interesting political dynamic of that group. They had a lot to say, but not a lot of backbone at the end of the day behind their threats. But one of the things that they did exact from the White House at the end was a commitment from the administration to strictly adhere to those phase-out dates for these tax credits. There is some concern, and I don't want to create unnecessary alarm, but it's something that we should keep our eye on, that for 48E, this construction start date, that definition could be altered. And there's definitely some chatter within the IRS and Treasury to make it, essentially to make it more difficult to meet the existing test for when you start construction. So that will have the effect of basically working those deadlines back a little bit more. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye out for. I'm sure Peter and Bob are too, but just flagging it out there. It's important to keep watch for some IRS guidance on all these provisions in the next couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, and I guess just to go a little bit deeper on this, right now, under current guidance, including some guidance that came out in the first Trump administration, for that matter, is that there's 2 tests to demonstrate that you've started construction on your solar facility. There's called the 5% safe harbor, which basically means you have to spend 5% of the cost of the facility in order to demonstrate that you've commenced construction. Or there's what's called a physical work test, which I won't go into details, but basically there's this test to show that you actually have started constructing your facility. There are rumors that 5% standard may change when the 45 days that Treasury has to come out with this new guidance is expected to come out. And what we're advising folks is to say, generally speaking, Treasury has always said you can rely on the guidance that as existence as it was up until the point the new guidance comes. So there hasn't been, at least, and I'm not aware of, I don't know, JP, or of any retroactive guidance where they've said, that, after the case, they come out and say, well, you had to have applied this test in the past. So presumably, if you start, make sure you meet one of those 2 tests now, you'll be okay on meeting that. But definitely come, August 18th, we may be in a different realm on that. So keep an eye out in late October for what might be.
Right. Congress passes, Treasury interprets, and things can change. If you look back to 2017, there were a number of interpretations that Treasury made that changed things around. So stay on top of it, but it is nice to talk about something that was accomplished as opposed to something that we're trying to do or trying to get done.
So you guys all work with these policymakers, and I always find it very interesting to hear about like some of the anecdotal, like inside baseball. You were alluding to a little bit of that, JP. Can you talk a little bit about maybe like who are some of our champions in Washington, D.C., and who are some of the villains to like this program more specifically than, of course, the whole bill, but for these provisions of affordable housing and tax credit increases, bonded debt ratio, those kind of nuanced things in the bill. Were there some loud voices in favor of and some maybe in dissent?
I'll start, and then everyone can fill in with the folks that I inevitably forget. But one of the interesting political dynamics of a bill. This is a bill that passed only with Republican votes. All the Democrats voted against it. But that doesn't mean that the Democrats also aren't quietly lobbying their Republicans to get some of their wish list items in the bill. And that very much happens in here. And I think that was part of work to our benefit to knowing that there was this broad support. We also had a tax bill last Congress that you may recall. That was a bipartisan tax bill that included a number of low-income housing tax credit expansion provisions. That died in the Senate, but it passed on a very bipartisan basis in the House. So these things sort of procedurally set us up for a lot of success. So certainly if you look across, the other thing too, before I forget to mention this, if you look at what's in the One Big Beautiful Bill, it is all related to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, extending those provisions, making them permanent. It's related to the Inflation Reduction Act, killing it off. Or it's a campaign promise of the president with 2, maybe 3 exceptions, and one of them is a low-income housing tax credit. There are a lot of people in DC who are very jealous of what we were able to accomplish. They had no shot of being included in this bill. So you look at Congressman LaHood, who's been just an unrelenting champion in the Ways and Means Committee for us. Todd Young over in the Senate. 2 strong housing voices, and they just really made this one of their top priorities. We also just have the overall advocacy efforts that we have done as an industry, as a group, all of you in this room as well, to have a bill that has as much support. We actually got more than half of the House on the big low-income housing tax credit bill last Congress. So in theory, it should have passed on its own, but that's not how that works. So we had all this support brewing. It's all these years of work. We were ready for this moment, and that's what opened the doors.
Yeah, I think Todd Young was a big player for us. He was in the room with Senator Chairman Mike Crapo, Senate Finance Chairman Mike Crapo, who promised last year when the Smith-Wyden bill didn't go through, that when he became chairman this year, he would take up the low-income housing tax credit, and he did. To credit, he did it, and he made it permanent. We didn't expect permanence. We've got some things still to work on. We're going to talk about what's next, but we're going to leave room for questions as well. But Todd Young was the guy in the room when the decisions were made. From Indiana, very good friend of housing, so I give him a lot of credit.
Yeah, I just want to also emphasize a couple things that JP said. You know, this has been something that's been going on for a long, long time. I mean, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act was first introduced in 2016, and this support has been building over the years. Every year we've gotten more co-sponsors for this legislation. And just to reemphasize what JP said, we had a vote in the House where we got 357 votes in favor of this, including a clear majority of House Republicans. So that was a really clear demonstration of the strong support behind the provisions. And I think it just really, advocacy matters. It pays off and we don't have many opportunities with big legislation like this. So you have to be kind of ready when they come down, and we were, and we got this great victory.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, like what JP was saying. I was talking to somebody in the lobby before this session, and I was telling people before this passed that this is going to happen. We're going to get an increase in credits, and they were like, "Well, how did you know that?" I was like, well, there's more than half of the House who has signed on as sponsors of this bill. Now, tell me in what crazy world that doesn't just pass on its own, but it didn't. They didn't even call it up for a vote.
Right.
And so it didn't pass the House. But I mean, like these guys are saying, you could see, like if you stay plugged into these types of issues, you could see, maybe the first year that was floated, we had 50 co-sponsors. And the next year, whatever, we had 100. But, you know, at some point when there's, 438 House members and we have 230 co-sponsors, I mean, the math is, well, we win. We've won. So it was just a matter of what bill it got attached to, what end of the year negotiation they do, which is what I thought it was going to be. That happens a lot. But it got put in there. And so I think it is important when TAP or NHB or TAA or TAB, any of our trade organizations ask you to call your legislator and get them to sign on as a co-sponsor. You know, it takes 6, 8, maybe 10 years, but eventually we win if we just don't give up and we stay, unrelenting on these changes. So, let's see. In these kind of negotiations, other things invariably crop up, like ideas, good ideas, bad ideas. Can you guys talk a little bit about some of those that raise their head and might be on the horizon, specifically some of the bad ideas or good ideas if they're out there that we can latch onto and start advocating for on the next 6, 8, 10-year long range? Let's do something good for our industry. JP, you want to start with that?
I call this an anticlimactic bill in terms of the results, but the process was anything but. And there were a number of challenging issues that we had to deal with throughout this process that we need to continue to be alert for whenever we have our next tax bill. Carried interest is something that's commonly used in the multifamily industry. That this thing has more lives than a cat. It's quite remarkable. I was positive we had no shot to preserve it, and it really, in 2017 in that tax bill, Trump went after it. He campaigned on eliminating carried interest. And he ultimately signed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act with some changes to the holding period, but carried interest remained. And then as we got into this fight, he again made carried interest one of his top targets, and they didn't touch it. But if that's something you're using in structuring the financing of your deals, it's always important to be alert that at some point, it may hit its last life. But right now it moves on, and a lot of the reason it survives is real estate. It's 100% real estate, and actually energy companies are using carried interest too. Those were the two groups when I talked to members of Congress. They said you and energy are the reasons we're keeping this in. And I think they took that argument to the president. The other thing that that popped up through this process and actually emerged as a big issue towards the end of last year, so basically after the election, when we knew that Republicans were going to be driving this bill forward as they won the White House, House, and Senate, was the potential to restrict or even eliminate the ability of businesses to deduct property taxes federally or state income taxes on your federal returns. Particularly on the property tax side, I don't need to tell you, but that would have been a massive tax increase on the multifamily side, and particularly challenging for affordable housing if that deduction for business property taxes had been eliminated. That was seriously considered for about 3 months. And there was a furious lobbying effort on that, not only by real estate, but just across the board. Unfortunately, Congress recognized that real estate can't pick up and move, and eliminating that deduction for property taxes would be a bad idea. And then they shifted to, well, okay, we're going to limit or eliminate the ability of businesses to deduct their state income taxes. Obviously not an issue here in Texas, but a lot of you have projects in the region or across the country. And again, it's just another way of increasing taxes on businesses. And that was actually in the bill until July 1st. And this was a bill signed into law on the 4th. So that was narrowly avoided, and an issue that I think we will see relitigated. My gut says somewhere around 2029 or 2030, because it's somewhat going to be connected with the individual SALT cap, which is one of the few temporary provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill that they increased it. And then the other thing that was very much on my mind, but fortunately didn't creep up, but has come up very frequently, is an expansion of the net investment income tax. I think that's something we need to always be alert for. That is a tax actually put in place to fund the Affordable Care Act, but it only applies to passive investments. So if you're an active investor, you're not subject to that 3.8% tax, which applies to rental income. But there have been efforts to expand that to active investments, which would mean all rental income would be subject to another 3.8% tax if you're a pass-through. So that's not helpful either. So again, those are a lot of bad ideas that we're able to stop through our advocacy efforts.
And the House the House had proposed a rural basis boost and a basis boost for bond deals, which went to the Senate and was taken out in exchange for permanence on the issues Peter mentioned and JP mentioned, the 12% and the reduced bond test. But I'd like to see those basis boosts come back into play. I talked to many people, and I personally like to see the basis boost idea, even a bigger basis boost for supportive services, come into play when the time comes. But for now, we've got what we've got.
Those are all great ideas, and I guess I would like to go a little bit out of the box and say the thing I kind of keeps me up at night is the concern about increasing cost of development. There was a story that popped up in the process concerning the bill on the Washington Post, which highlighted one development that had costs of $1.2 million a unit, and those stories are never helpful, unfortunately. And I mean, there's always lots of reasons behind them. You know, it's never one thing, right, that causes that. But I worry that if we continue to have these stories, that someone will start saying, maybe this program doesn't deserve to have the resources it have, it's spending it like that way. And so I think it's something it's been a long-standing issue. It's not new. We've had concerns about that for many, many, many years, and it will probably continue to be. But I do think this is something we need to keep an eye on as the program becomes bigger and does more for affordable housing. It becomes somewhat of a bigger target, and these type of stories are never helpful.
Yeah, that's great feedback, Peter. Before we go to questions, one more topic I think is interesting to touch on is, what do you guys see on the horizon as next political battles that will affect this industry? Tariffs, anything else you can think of, cost issues, and just generally, is there a move? Like, you read headlines and you see stories and you see people giving lip service to the affordable housing crisis that our country's facing. Especially with single-family housing, the price of home ownership is skyrocketed, like at no other time probably in this country's history. And is there any movement in Washington to actually do something about that? Like, I know in our Texas legislature, to pat them on the back, they did something in the arena of requiring cities, I think if you have, I can't remember what the population threshold was, maybe it's 200,000 or something like that, you have to allow for 3,000 square foot lots in your development code, in your subdivision code. So that's like meaningful legislation, right, to address the affordable housing crisis, more density and lower priced single family housing. Is there anything like that being talked about on a federal level that you guys are privy to, or that you can forecast or see on the horizon?
I'm happy to start. So tariffs, you mentioned that tariffs are an ongoing challenge for the industry, not just because they're increasing the cost of building materials, but they are seemingly changing by the hour. So predictability is not something we're going to see. I'll also put labor up there. That is something that we at the National Association of Home Builders are trying to tackle head on, of particularly how we can get more involvement from our domestic labor supply into the trades. And we're working closely with the administration to see what opportunities there are to expand resources for the trades and education programs there. But, you know, I'm going back to the tariffs. We had a meeting recently with the Commerce Department to discuss Canadian softwood lumber, and one of the feedback points we got from the administration was they said, you know, if you had come in here and said we want an exemption from the tariffs, it would have been a very short meeting. And the point is that this administration is not negotiating exemptions. What we did ask them to do is negotiate trade deals. And that's our position, and that's going to be our focus, is to really push them for where we know we get a substantial amount of goods used in construction from foreign countries. We want them to go to those countries and negotiate a deal so that if we're going to have tariffs, let us know what the rate is. Let's have that predictability, and let's be able to manage it. This back and forth is really damaging to development. So that's a big challenge. In terms of, I think, a viewpoint of what can we do to provide relief, there's a lot of conversations happening out there, but unfortunately, it's just more conversations. To actually get Congress to do something, particularly to do something that's going to rein in local government, isn't something that a politician wants to do because of the pushback they get. I saw something, I think it was last week, where former President Obama sort of took Democratic leaders in blue areas to task, something along the lines of, you're always sympathizing what the working man is going through, the working family is going through, but yet you're making it impossible for them to own a home because no one can build. So we need voices like that on both sides of the political aisle. We have some ideas like Todd Young, who we mentioned before. He has his Yes in My Backyard Act, which basically puts a spotlight on what local governments are doing, but doesn't necessarily mandate change. But still, if we even have a spotlight, that's a good step forward.
I think on the domestic side, BABA, NEPA, and Davis-Bacon are things that are being discussed right now, both at the White House. We've had discussions with the White House. I'm thinking that when this is all done and the reconciliation process is done, Treasury's issued some rules. I think we'll see Build America, Buy America, which is kind of popular with Trump because of the name, get tampered down a little bit. NEPA is the elimination of NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, which migrated into housing. It was never intended for housing, is already being targeted by commerce right now as we speak. So I think some of the domestic regulatory things will happen in the upcoming year, if not sooner.
Yeah, Bob, I just want to second Bob's point about the regulatory relief. There's a lot of things that one could do to make it a lot less expensive through changing federal regulations. With respect to NEPA in particular, there's lots of crazy components of that. Like, for instance, say you get an FHA loan to finance your property, and as you're going through the process, you realize you need, and you passed your test initially, and then you decide, I need some home funding to fill a gap in this property I got an FHA. Got to do it all over again. I mean, that's insane. It doesn't make any sense. And so another example of that is, say you're preserving property that was initially constructed with federal assistance. It's already gone through its NEPA process when it was newly constructed. why do we have to go through the same process again to preserve that property? You're not building anything new. You're preserving that property there. I mean, you may be rehabbing it, but there should be, a differentiation there. And this is ways that we can make changes to federal regulations to reduce costs, which I think would be helpful. But Bobby, you mentioned about new ideas on home ownership. There is one idea that was inspired by the housing credit and by the new markets tax credit as well. It's called the neighborhood homes tax credit, which would give allocations to states to finance single-family homes, and operate very similarly. You have a per capita allocations. States would have qualified allocation plans. So a lot of the familiar elements that are used for LIHTC, but it would be applied to single family, especially to deal with what's called the appraisal gap, where the cost to either newly construct or acquire and rehab a single family property costs more than what it can be sold for. And you could get a tax credit for that difference. And, I think there was an effort to potentially get to the reconciliation bill, but, new things were really hard to get in. JP mentioned that LIHTC was one of the few things that were outside of the TCJA, Trump, and IRA buckets that got in the bill. So, and that was an existing program with 40 years of demonstrated performance. Even though it's been inspired by LIHTC, it's still a new idea. And I think new ideas always take a little bit longer before Congress is ready to move on that. But I think there's a chance, in the coming years that something like this could advance as well.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up, Peter. I don't know is Kent Conine in the room? There he is. So, not 2002, 2003, you were president of NHB? 2002, somewhere in there, Kent? Oh, yep. So there was a move to have a single-family tax credit. And I was very surprised. I want to mention this anecdote to this room because if it's coming back, I think this is very important. And I was a single-family home builder before I became a tax credit developer. And so I was very interested about the idea of a single-family tax credit. And I went to the NAHB multifamily, and I went to other multifamily conferences, and I had this general sentiment that the multifamily developers were like, well, I don't do single family, I don't care about that. And some of them were even out like hostile towards it. Well, we don't need that. We should get more low-income housing. If there's an idea like this for single family tax credits, the people in this room are the experts on that. And there's an opportunity for us. Even if you don't do single family development, take the opportunity to grab onto that and be a consultant or something, because I'm telling you, as a single family home builder, the other single family home builders in this country have no idea what we do. And they have no idea how a tax credit works. Just like everybody else that you go to a cocktail party and they ask you what you do, and you say, well, I'm a tax credit developer. Oh, I know about that. So you get property tax abatements. No, not what I'm talking about. I have no idea what we're talking about, right? So if there's a move for this, I encourage everybody to pay attention to that and realize that there's an opportunity for all of us there to make some money and expand our businesses with a new type of tax credit. So, and with that, I kind of want to open it up to questions from the crowd. Go ahead and just raise your hand. We'll bring you a mic. Awesome. Okay, great. And I've got some questions if we start running low. So.
You guys are making me walk and work today.
That's why I gave up my mic, so.
Thank you. I have one question and one possible suggestion. Question is any discussion in Congress on workforce housing and any kind of additional benefits that could be brought to the missing middle, whether it's with LIHTC, without it, on the bond side, any creative approaches you're seeing that us as an industry can help support you in pushing forward, because I think the missing middle is kind of the next spot where politics might need to go. And then the one suggestion, because tariffs could be here for a while and it creates uncertainties in construction costs, I know this is a way deeper market, and so the economics kind of don't line from our market to the other, but would there be a way to incentivize tax credits for use to offset tariff payments, such that we have some synergy there and expand the universe of investors that could possibly utilize a tax credit to offset tariff costs for construction? I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I wanted to throw it out there to the smarter folks that might be able to find a win-win with that.
Talk about my tax.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, there, on your first part of your question, there is a proposal out there. It's been introduced and reintroduced as well. It's called the Workforce Housing Tax Credit, which really is even more so like LIHTC than even neighborhood homes, in that it all really is, borrows the entire same structure, except for it can, you know, give, you can use it to finance properties with units going from 60 to 100% of area median income. And we've been able to make it really flexible over the years. Every Congress, we get another sort of tweak to the bill to make it that much easier to combine it with LIHTC. So you could say you have a 100-unit building, and you could have 40 units at LIHTC, 40 at MITEC and 20 market rate, and it all still would work. I mean, you would get less of a credit than you would for LIHTC, but that makes sense given if you're serving higher income families, you're getting more rental income from that. So it doesn't, it's still trying to work to get broader support for that. It's been kind of, people were saying, well, we need to do LIHTC first before we consider these things. Well, we just did LIHTC in a big way, so I think maybe we'll have, have folks have a second look at this legislation, because it is, you're absolutely right. The cost burdens are climbing up the income ladder and among renter households, and more areas are going to be able to benefit from this.
I'll touch a little bit on the idea of a tax credit to offset the higher building material prices. So obviously you have bonus depreciation coming back and certain write-offs that you can avail yourself of. But in terms of having specific tax offset for tariffs, that runs pretty 180 degrees from the administration's perspective on tariffs. The administration views tariffs as being paid by the country that is importing that product to us. That's their message, that's their focus. Anything other than that would run counter to their view of the role tariffs play. They also view the role of tariffs as driving other countries to negotiate trade deals with us. And that's happening. Not as fast as we would like, but it's definitely happening. So the idea of providing some type of offset for that, I think, particularly by Republicans in Congress, would be viewed as a tax credit for the importing country, benefiting them. And I don't see there being any appetite for that, unfortunately. So I think that's why our push is really